we'll just kind of get started and let him do his spinning wheel there. My name's Robert Schneider. This is Bobby Martinez. I own Phenix Bait Company. Bobby is a saltwater tournament angler, so he'll handle most of the saltwater stuff tonight. I got a few things I'll probably add because, of course, I'm here to try to sell product, and he's here just to help me sell product.
Point to the sitting room, please. Point to sitting room. Point to sitting room, please.
We do both fresh, Phenix Bait, I do both fresh and saltwater stuff. The company is about 50-50 as far as the business goes, and that's probably because I fish about half the time in the freshwater and half the time in the saltwater, so it's kind of reflected. The neat thing about owning a bait company is, as you discover certain lures and you start using them and you start going, well, I could do this and make that a little better or tinker with that, and you own the company's like, well, you do it and then you just start selling the stuff. What the hell, invent a better mousetrap, right? So, that's half the fun of owning the company, coming up with better mousetraps. The first mousetrap I kind of got into after we got started is drop shot weight. And go ahead and pass it around. Don't eat it, there's a whole bit about lead being poisonous. Mostly, but what you'll notice on that is it's got a unique clip on it, right? And it's shaped a little different than what you're probably used to with most weights. And the reason for that is because I got tired of those ones that other companies were making that were in the shape of a cannonball or something like that, and they always seem to get stuck and break off quite a lot. Right? So it's like, okay, I can do that. And so I did some research, figured out where to buy the clips, built the mold, that whole bit. And there's a couple months worth of thinking about it. It's not a total cylinder because I thought that was just too long. You get to a 1/4 inch and those ones that were a total cylinder like a pencil, they start getting really long and they get hard. I needed something in between, a cannonball and a pencil, basically. And so that's what you got there. Fortunately, it doesn't have those weights yet, but coming soon to a Sportsley near you. They have promised to order them.
Well, we have some.
Yeah, no, they only give you one. But, so that leads me into the whole thing of drop shotting, right? And drop shotting primarily for me is a freshwater application, but there's nothing wrong with drop shotting in saltwater. I've got a couple of guides on my pro staff, and they drop shot in saltwater stuff too. The basics for the freshwater drop shotting is, the weight's below the bait, which for you saltwater guys, it's a lot like a dropper loop, only has a spring cramp. Now, I'm using a robo worm, and there's lots of different worms on the shelves there. I'm not endorsed by robo worms, so I'm not pushing their product, but they make good stuff. If I could make a better, bait, then I'd probably try to give it a shot, and I can't, so I'm just going to buy their stuff. But as far as fishing then, the basic technique, and it works both fresh and salt water, would be to, let me go over here and show you. And, I'm going to cast that out a little bit farther than that, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it hit the bottom, and in water, that plastic would help that bait float above the bottom. But what I do here is I drag it, just like this, not a whole lot. Then I'll reel down the slack, and then I also shake it. Okay, then I'll pause it. And I'll drag it, reel down the slack, shake it, pause it. I'm doing everything I can think of basically because I don't know what the pattern for the fish are yet. There's no magic. They always hit on the shake, or they always hit on the fall, or they always hit on the drag. I've probably caught more of my fish on the pause than anything else, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it turns out I get bit when I'm reeling it up. If that happens to me a couple times, then I start thinking, well, maybe I need to start swimming this thing, cast it out and kind of slow reel it back. And, it works freshwater, saltwater. We've got guys that do that out in San Diego Bay. Different bait, but the same setup. In the bay, you're going to need to use a heavier weight, probably heavier line. You've got current to deal with in the bay, or on a party boat for that matter. You can do the same thing. It's a dropper loop. difference is it just doesn't have a loop there sticking out with the hook. It's right there, and it has some advantages because, you know, on a dropper loop, you still have some play here. You might not feel the bite, but on a drop shot, you're going to feel the bite instantly. The line, you probably noticed right up here, it changes. And I'm going to drop it down a little bit. Quick. So what I've got here is I've got fluorocarbon and I've got braid. Okay. Now, I don't use braid for every application. I use it for a lot of things. I don't use fluorocarbon for everything either. I don't use mono for everything. You know, each of those has got a place for, you know, an application. When I'm using a spinning reel, I almost always have braid on the spinning reel. And the reason is because I think that's the best application for the braid. When you use a spinning reel, I'm sure many of you have, and you've had over the years the experience of what we call a wind knot, right? What really it is your line has twisted up. Well, drop shotting or just about any other technique, when you reel this back, it starts to twist in circles. Braid absorbs that line twist much, much better than a fluorocarbon or a monofilament line. Okay? At the same time, there are some disadvantages to braid. Braid does not like rocks. If you take your shirt on a rock, which is a cloth, I mean that's what this is, and you rub it on a rock, it's just going to rip the shirt, right? Same thing happens with this. If you rub it on a rock, it's going to rip the braid. If you rub fluorocarbon on a rock, eventually you can break it, but it's going to take a lot more effort. It really absorbs the nicks and the dings from rocks better than the braid, so that's why I've got both on here. Okay. Now, I also only have the fluorocarbon the length of my rod. That's not so much for the spinning reel application, but on a bait casting reel, if you put a lot more on this, when you go to reel it up, you're going to end up with that knot down here in the spool, and you're going to go cast it, and you're going to have that knot going over your hand. Okay? Again, it's not so much of a spinning reel application for that length, but if you do this with a bait caster, and I drop shot a lot with a bait caster, I won't go any longer with my leader than the length of my rod because I don't want that knot coming over my thumb. Okay? There's a lot of different stuff I can tell you about the size braid, the size fluorocarbon. I'll just give you some quick basics, and I try to go with about a 20-pound or a 30-pound braid, which usually then will give me the same diameter as a 6 or an 8 or a 10-pound fluorocarbon leader. That's for freshwater application. For saltwater application, you know, my ending point for the freshwater stuff is like the starting point for the saltwater. I'll start with 30 or 40 braid, and then I'll start with 10 or 12 or 15 pound, you know, leader for the drop shot in the bay and that type of thing. As far as the knots go, I use a double uni. For the knots that goes here, it's called a Palomar. You can find almost all these knots in great, you know, demonstrations on YouTube nowadays. You know, and you can just watch it till your heart's content. You know, try it and do it. And you know, it's so much easier to learn a knot that way than it is, you know, somebody to show you one time and they keep getting their fingers in the way. You can't get them to back up or whatever. If you want to stick around, I'll be happy to show you knots. But I'm telling you, the easiest way nowadays is those great YouTube videos, you know, on how to tie the knot. There's other knots I use for different applications as well. My basic rule of thumb with a knot is just pick one and learn to tie it right. It's usually not the knot that fails so much as the guy who tied it wrong. Okay? You know, a Palomar knot is supposed to be about 100%. But if you tie it to where one piece twists over the other one, when it starts getting tight, it's going to break. Right there where one piece is twisted over the other. If there's no twist, it'll hold just as long as any other does. Which also brings me to the whole idea of this. The biggest idea of this is that it'll break before the hook if you tie the knot right. If the knot's not tied right, it'll break right here at the hook, and then you got to retie everything. But as you saw, if I just pull it right there, and everything's set the way it's supposed to, then I get this back, and all I got to do is put another sinker on it. I don't have to retie the whole thing. Bait, for saltwater stuff, I like things like saltwater gulp shrimp. They're pretty small. They're great for, you know, the spotted bay bass, sometimes, you know, the calico, the sand bass, that type of thing. I'll catch a halibut on it occasionally. Back to the freshwater application, we call this Texas rig because the way it sticks straight out. I don't know why they're using it for Texas, but you know, that's what they call it. Some baits, what we'll do is we'll do what they call wacky rig. We'll stick it in the middle. And so now it comes through the water like this. It's got a little more action. The other advantage to fishing like that, the wacky rig, if you now have two rudders instead of just one, it doesn't spin as much. The other thing I've noticed is that we make a bait called a Saturn worm, which is very similar to the robo worm here. It's got a curly tail. That's the bottom line. And that curly tail on a straight worm, with a curly tail, tends to keep it from flicking as much as a plain straight. You know, the one I showed you, the power had it right here at the beginning. That is like the worst as far as getting. Oh yeah, I'm getting. Here we go. It's about the worst as far as getting line through it. But because it's Texas rigged on there, it's almost weedless, so I can throw that in sticks, whereas if I wacky rig it and that hook is sticking out, it's going to get caught on every stick it runs into. I think I've probably covered more stuff than you can even imagine with drop shot. Any questions?
What kind of hook are you using?
This hook right here happens to be an owner down shot hook. I like the owner down shot hook. I also like the Gamakatsu split shot hook. I usually use a 1 or a 1/0. It's going to depend on the bait. I try to match the size of the hook to the bait. I'm not worried about the size of the fish as far as the hook goes. I mean, you know, I caught a huge fish on, you know, number 4 hook. You know, and I caught small fish on, you know, 4/0. So I think it's really about matching the bait.
Does the look matter? Fishes, or is it just what I'm thinking is when I'm out, like by Catalina and stuff, sometimes I'm confused as to which hook to use. Sometimes I'm thinking okay, I'm gonna put a big hook. I'm gonna catch everything with a big hook.
Yeah, it's not, size hook doesn't really matter so much to the size fish you're catching. The size hook matters to the size bait. It's trying to match up your bait. So a bigger bait, a bigger hook. You know, if you're using little pinheads, then you're going to want, you know, a number 4, a number 2 live bait hook probably. If you got some, you know, nice, you know, larger bait, then, you know, a 1/0 or a 2/0. You know, when you go out tuna fishing, you know, sometimes they get some nice bait, right?
Yeah.
And now you're looking at 4/0 or, you know, or bigger like that. In my tackle box, I'll always have 2/0 down to a 2. Yeah, that pretty much covers anything that I would need on a regular party boat or a twilight trip up to, say, a day and a half. And I've never really found a need to have anything bigger than a 2/0 or anything smaller than a number 2. Usually everything in between there. The one I'd probably use the most is the 1 and the 1/0.
Forward 392, forward 392, forward 392, please.
Tuna fishing, what kind of bait is the best to use? Like, and do artificial baits work as good as live baits?
We'll probably cover a little bit more on tuna, but real quick with that question. You know, later we talk more about the saltwater stuff. Nothing works better than live bait. I mean, everything else is an imitation of live bait. Whether or not you want to, you know, take live bait with you, because there's a lot of drawbacks to that. You know, space on the boat, you know, your boat, party boat, you know, keeping it alive, that type of thing. Everything else is trying to mimic some sort of live bait, and you're trying to help mimic it by the action and do it with live reel. And when we get more into saltwater, we'll show you some plastics that we like to use, and some lead heads that we like to use. And everything from calico bass, sand bass, yellowtail, tuna. You got a question?
Yeah. What kind of hooks, like circle hooks or like octopus hooks or like, what kind of hooks do you recommend?
Well, it depends upon the technique you use. You know, right now we're kind of talking about the drop shot. So I like the down shot hook and the drop shot hook. For, you know, things like tuna, I like circle hook because you don't have to set the hook. I don't think you really get much set in line. I don't care what kind of line it is. You know, when it's 50 yards out there, and and you got a rod that's gonna bend down, you know, and I think the hook set's kind of ridiculous. There's so much stretch on the line, so much stretch on the rod, so I go into performance for the most part with the bigger species with live bait. You know, that's it.
Circle hook always with live bait?
Huh?
Circle hook always with live bait?
For me, yeah. Not everybody likes that. Some people like the, you know, the live bait hook, but I like the circle hook, you know. I tried different ones. It comes down to confidence. Anything else about the drop shot?
Scuba 391, Scuba 391, please.
Okay, your turn.
Looks like I got a lot of saltwater guys here, huh? Before we get into the tuna, I know you guys were anxious about tuna and turkey. We're going to cover a little bit about in the winter. Something I like to fish for bass here is called a swim jig. And it's just a weedless jig head with a skirt on it. And this kind of mimics like a crustacean, a crab. Good winter bait, you know, like January, February, March. We can start getting into even spring. You know, I still use something like this.
I have a dumb question. Why is it weedless?
Oh, this has a weed guard on it.
That thing up in
Yeah, see? And it won't let it get caught up. I mean, it will at times, but for the most part, you can pretty much punch in through kelp, you know, get away with really crawling it. This is something I really like in the winter months. Fish are lethargic and whatnot.